I remember when a steam-powered elevated train puffed above the famous Bowery. An oyster cart passes as it passed 6 decades ago. For this is New York in the gay 90s. I remember, too, when fire wagons careened through the streets, as in this rare, authentic scene. The horse was king, the automobile merely an inventor's foolish dream. Fire horses and fire wagons thunder out of sight, followed by excited little boys who, if they survive today, are old men in their 70s. Another pioneer cameraman recorded Broadway on a sunny afternoon with its passing trolleys, busy trolley conductor, and policeman in domed helmet, all years before the century turned. Easter parade on Fifth Avenue was never so elegant as in the days of magnificent whiskers, high hats and bowlers, sweeping dresses, and gigantic feathers and bows. Elegant, too, was the London of the 1890s. This view of Hyde Park Corner was shown to Queen Victoria in a command performance at Windsor Castle on November 23rd, 1896. Proof that the traffic jam wasn't born with the auto is this London street caught in a tangle of tall wagons and amazingly well-behaved horses. A huge Ferris wheel and the Eiffel Tower itself were built in Paris in 1889. French working girls primly punched out on early time clocks. This scene by Lumiere of a grand exit from his factory is one of the first movie shots ever filmed. Gaily bedecked streets greeted the crowds, for this was the year of the fabulous Paris Exposition. Even then, Paris was the fashion capital. Egret feathers were the rage, as were skirts so tight you needed a parasol for balance. These completely untailored suits were just the thing for feeding the fish. For afternoon tea, a lady got dressed to the teeth. This was great-grandmother's new look, but don't laugh. Tomorrow it may be back. Belle of the gay 90s was Lillian Russell, whose well-upholstered beauty became a legend. Buffalo Bill, Indian scout and showman, toured his Wild West circus. Shy, obscure Orville Wright with his brother Wilbur at left, in 12 airborne seconds changed the course of human history more decisively than 100 years of wars. No movie cameraman filmed man's first powered flight in 1903. These pictures, same pilot, same plane, same place, were made a short time later. In 1906, stunned citizens of San Francisco gazed at their city reduced to ruins by 2 days of earthquake and fire. 452 were killed. The damage was $350 million. Everyone has heard of the San Francisco earthquake, but few remember a far greater disaster, the Ohio floods of 7 years later. We are in the city of Dayton, the walls of its buildings, ripped clean by the force of rushing water. Here, too, survivors of long ago numbly examine their shattered homes. Only the skeleton of Dayton remains. The loss of life, 730. In a great scene out of the past, we travel toward pumping fire engines and a venturesome contemporary car, mementos of a disaster that swept into the headlines and then was strangely forgotten. By 1910, a new San Francisco had arisen from the earthquake's ashes, and the automobile was coming into its own. For a little while, the dying age of the horse and the newly born age of the auto lived side by side on city streets. A horse-drawn bus and a touring car crossed paths in New York, where already the gas-eating motorized monsters had begun to predominate. The auto called forth new fashions, like this 1910 trouser skirt. As Milady stepped up, she might reveal a well-turned ankle. Lady hunters came coyly equipped with submachine guns. On European beaches, the bare leg made its first exciting appearance. But it took several years for America to accept this daring innovation. Meanwhile, barnstormers were popularizing the airplane. Aviation was developing through trial and error, mostly error. Designers experimented with planes built like box kites. Planes that looked as if the morning dew had warped their wings. and planes that resembled flying whales. This eager inventor makes sure he'll get off the ground by starting in mid-air on a cable. Yet despite all his pains, he ends up hung up. America's foremost aviatrix was Ruth Law, one of 7 U.S. women pilots licensed before World War I. It took a determined lady to face the stinging wind in an open plane. But the 1910s were filled with determined ladies, and the most determined were the parading, crusading, never-say-die suffragettes. Their motto, votes for women. Their greatest weapon, an unquenchable zeal. Former President Teddy Roosevelt, no small admirer of courage and spirit, was a staunch friend who often spurred them on from the porch of his home in Oyster Bay. The insufferable suffragettes, as their opponents called them, capped their exploits by picketing the White House itself. A riot developed, and soon the paddy wagon arrived to pack the pickets off to prison. To their burden of ridicule and hostility was added time in jail. It only spurred them on. Upon release, they proudly donned their prison garb and toured the country, their banner proclaiming, "Resistance to tyranny is obedience to God." For proof that women could still be feminine and expensive, note this chic coat of ermine. This stole of chinchilla featured plenty of room for improvement. Whip together a few dozen yards of chinchilla for this Tenting Tonight number. It cost $10,000 in a day when 5 cents bought beer and free lunch. The bare-legged one-piece bathing suit finally reached the U.S., and the beach became more popular than ever. Now that American men were seeing more of their women, that house-made spread just had to go. From here on in, the girls would have to watch their figures. It was the era of the scientist, and the greatest was Thomas Edison, camping with naturalist John Burroughs with the beard, and rubber magnate Harvey Firestone in the funny hat. Edison, inventor of the electric light, phonograph, and motion pictures, takes a cat nap. He poses with plant wizard Luther Burbank and Henry Ford, the first mass producer of cars. In 1912, Republican President William Howard Taft was campaigning for re-election. He had been groomed for the presidency by his predecessor, Theodore Roosevelt. But when Taft was renominated, Roosevelt split with the GOP and formed his own progressive Bull Moose party. The old Rough Rider was hit by an assassin's bullet, but recovered and went right on campaigning, the most colorful figure of his time. Leader of the Democrats for 30 years was William Jennings Bryan. 3 times he ran for the presidency, and 3 times he was defeated despite his powers as an orator. But in 1912, Woodrow Wilson, not Bryan, was the Democratic candidate. A dark horse backed by Bryan, he had been president of Princeton University and was governor of New Jersey. Now, with the Republicans split asunder by Roosevelt's third party, he was elected President of the United States. On Inauguration Day, 1913, Woodrow Wilson took the oath. Only one other Democrat, Grover Cleveland, had been elected to the nation's highest office since before the Civil War. The new president rode in triumph down Pennsylvania Avenue. Just ahead lay the Mexican border clash and the First World War. But that is another story for another time. Here in the inaugural parade, the past joins hands with the present. For somewhere among the gray lines of West Pointers is Cadet Dwight David Eisenhower. And so the President of the United States, should he ever see this picture, could join those among us who can say, "I remember when."